The ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas is one of the most complex and deeply rooted struggles in the Middle East, with multiple political, religious, and territorial dimensions. The relationship between these two entities has been marked by numerous violent confrontations, peace negotiations, and shifting dynamics. The video titled Israel's War on Hamas provides a detailed overview of the conflict, presenting Israel's military actions as justified and emphasizing the country's efforts to eliminate Hamas, which it perceives as a direct threat to its security. In this essay, we will break down the major points discussed in the video, while adding more context and expanding on the historical, political, and geographical factors that define this conflict. The essay will cover the background of the Israel-Hamas relationship, the role of key regions like Gaza and the Philadelphia Corridor, as well as the broader international reaction and the implications for peace in the region. The Israel-Hamas conflict. A brief background. The roots of the Israel-Hamas conflict trace back to the broader Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which is itself intertwined with centuries of territorial disputes, religious claims, and political ideologies. At the core of this conflict is the struggle over the land of Israel-Palestine, which both Israelis and Palestinians claim as their homeland. The group known as Hamas emerged in 1987 during the First Intifada, a Palestinian uprising against Israeli control. Founded by Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, Hamas is an Islamist organization that, unlike its more secular counterpart Fatah, which dominates the Palestinian Authority, promotes the establishment of an Islamic state in the entirety of historic Palestine. Hamas's founding charter calls for the destruction of Israel and opposes any peace treaties or negotiations that would recognize Israel's right to exist. By 2006, Hamas had gained significant political power, winning elections in Gaza, after which it violently took control of the Gaza Strip in 2007, displacing Fatah forces. Since then, Hamas has ruled Gaza, and its military wing, the Izz ad-Din al-Qassam brigades, has frequently engaged in rocket attacks, tunnel operations, and other forms of armed resistance against Israel. Israel, in turn, considers Hamas a terrorist organization and has launched multiple military campaigns in Gaza to neutralize Hamas's capabilities. One-sided reporting and media narratives. A critical theme in the video is the notion that mainstream media reports tend to focus on the suffering of Palestinian civilians without fully accounting for the actions of Hamas. While there is no doubt that the humanitarian situation in Gaza is dire, Israel often argues that Hamas uses civilians as human shields and embeds its military infrastructure in civilian areas, thereby exacerbating civilian casualties when Israel retaliates. In this context, it's important to recognize that reporting on the Israel-Hamas conflict is influenced by different perspectives and political agendas. While Israeli military actions often receive widespread criticism due to the significant loss of life and infrastructure in Gaza, others argue that insufficient attention is given to Hamas's tactics, including its use of civilian areas for rocket launches and the construction of a tunnel network aimed at infiltrating Israeli territory. Gaza and the Philadelphia Corridor. The video provides a geographical and strategic overview of the conflict, focusing on Gaza and the Philadelphia Corridor. Gaza is a densely populated coastal strip bordered by Israel to the east and north, Egypt to the south, and the Mediterranean Sea to the west. It is home to over 2 million Palestinians, many of whom are refugees or descendants of refugees from the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. Gaza has been under a tight blockade by both Israel and Egypt since Hamas seized control in 2007, with severe restrictions on the movement of goods and people. This blockade has led to significant humanitarian challenges in Gaza, including high levels of poverty, unemployment, and limited access to medical supplies and clean water. Israel argues that the blockade is necessary to prevent weapons and materials that could be used for military purposes from entering Gaza, while critics claim that the blockade constitutes collective punishment of the civilian population. A particularly significant area mentioned in the video is the Philadelphia Corridor, a narrow strip of land along the southern border of Gaza that separates it from Egypt. According to the 1979 Egypt-Israel Peace Treaty, Egypt was responsible for maintaining security along this border, but Israel alleges that Egypt has failed to prevent the smuggling of weapons and supplies into Gaza through a network of tunnels built by Hamas. These tunnels have become a key part of Hamas's strategy, allowing it to smuggle weapons, fighters, and supplies despite the Israeli and Egyptian blockades. Israel took control of the Philadelphia corridor during previous military operations in Gaza and uncovered an extensive tunnel network. The video claims that some of these tunnels were large enough to fit vehicles and extended deep into Egyptian territory, which raises concerns about Egypt's complicity or inability to control its side of the border. This discovery intensified Israel's efforts to close off all access points to Gaza and destroy Hamas's tunnel infrastructure, which Israel sees as vital to Hamas's survival and ability to wage war. Historical context: the 1947 UN Partition Plan. To further contextualize the conflict, the video discusses a key historical event: the 1947 United Nations Partition Plan. This plan proposed dividing the land of historic Palestine into two separate states, one Jewish and one Arab, with Jerusalem being placed under international administration. The Jewish leadership accepted the plan, seeing it as a legal basis for the establishment of the State of Israel, while the Arab leadership rejected it, objecting to the loss of what they considered their land and the large number of Palestinian Arabs who would be displaced or live under Jewish sovereignty. The rejection of the partition plan by the Arab world led to the First Arab-Israeli War in 1948, during which Israel declared its independence and secured control over much of the territory allocated to it under the UN plan. This conflict resulted in the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinian Arabs, an event known to Palestinians as the Nakba, or catastrophe. The legacy of this war and the subsequent territorial disputes continue to fuel the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to this day. Egypt's role and the blockade of the Straits of Tiran. The video also highlights Egypt's role in the conflict, particularly during the lead-up to the Six-Day War in 1967. A key point of contention was the Egyptian blockade of the Straits of Tiran, a crucial waterway that connects the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aqaba and provides Israel with access to the Indian Ocean. In 1967, Egypt closed the straits to Israeli shipping, effectively cutting off Israel's vital oil imports and sparking one of the key events that led to the outbreak of war. Israel viewed the blockade as an act of war and responded by launching a preemptive strike against Egypt, which quickly escalated into a full-scale regional conflict involving several Arab states. The Six-Day War resulted in a decisive Israeli victory, with Israel capturing the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, the West Bank from Jordan, and the Golan Heights from Syria. Although the Sinai was later returned to Egypt as part of a peace agreement, Israel's occupation of the West Bank and Golan Heights continues to be a major source of tension in the region. Israel's withdrawal from Gaza and the 2005 disengagement. In 2005, Israel unilaterally withdrew its military forces and settlements from Gaza as part of a policy known as the disengagement plan. The withdrawal was intended to reduce friction between Israelis and Palestinians and demonstrate Israel's willingness to make concessions for peace. However, the move was met with mixed reactions. While some saw it as a step toward a two-state solution, others, particularly within Israel, viewed it as a security risk. After the disengagement, Hamas won the Palestinian parliamentary elections in 2006 and, following a violent struggle with Fatah, took full control of Gaza in 2007. Since then, Israel's blockade and periodic military operations in Gaza have been aimed at containing Hamas's military activities and preventing it from launching attacks on Israeli civilians. The Rafah ground operation and international reaction. The video also touches on Israel's ground operation in Rafah, a city located near the border with Egypt. This operation, like many others, drew significant international criticism due to fears of a humanitarian crisis, as Rafah is densely populated and any military action could lead to heavy civilian casualties. The speaker in the video argues that Israel made efforts to minimize civilian harm by evacuating civilians before entering the city, though such claims are often met with skepticism by international human rights organizations. The future of the conflict. Prospects for defeating Hamas. The video concludes with the claim that Israel is nearing victory over Hamas, citing its control over Gaza's borders and the isolation of Hamas from its supply routes. However, it remains unclear whether a military victory alone can resolve the deeper political and ideological issues driving the conflict. Hamas enjoys significant support within Gaza, and its defeat could lead to further destabilization of the region if no viable alternative governance structure is in place. The international community remains divided over how to approach the conflict, with some countries supporting Israel's right to defend itself, while others call for an immediate ceasefire and a focus on humanitarian relief. Ultimately, any long-term solution will likely require a comprehensive peace agreement that addresses the underlying grievances of both Israelis and Palestinians. Conclusion. The conflict between Israel and Hamas is a deeply entrenched and multifaceted struggle that involves historical grievances, territorial disputes, and ideological differences. While the video Israel's war on Hamas presents a case for Israel's military actions, it is important to recognize the broader context and the diverse perspectives involved in this conflict. Any path to peace will require addressing the legitimate concerns of both sides and finding a way to move beyond the cycle of violence and retribution that has defined the Israel-Palestinian conflict for decades.